Welcome to the Master Your Millions podcast, the show all about your financial potential and leaving a legacy for future generations. Here are your hosts, Jason and Scott Henderson.
Welcome back, everyone. I am your host, Scott Henderson, and my co-host is Dr. J. We've had a lot of requests going on lately, a lot of questions coming in, people who want answers, a lot of things that are pretty specific. So we're going to do things a little bit differently today.
Hey, I like that idea, Scott. I want to respond to our listeners and let them get some answers. I know that they've been listening to our podcast. They love some of the success stories and failures, yet they seem to be asking questions that leads me to believe that financial education is broken. So, folks, here is the real curriculum. So to start off with, Scott, what would you guess the percentage of Americans that don't receive meaningful financial education?
Oh, I would guess it's a pretty high amount. Just from what I learned in school, I didn't learn anything, and I went to business school.
That's funny. Yeah, let's talk K through 12. Didn't you have one financial class that in high school that you were required to take? Do you remember much about it?
Yeah, it was called adult rules, and if I remember correctly, they showed you how to create a budget and told you to pay your taxes, and that was like it. They didn't tell you how to calculate your taxes. They didn't tell you about tax forms or how to balance a checkbook or literally anything else.
So probably also talked about the importance of getting a good job and maxing out your 401k.
Yep, more or less. Let someone else do it for you.
And basically hoping, that's probably the plan that hope that everything works out. I have a business card I share with people, and one of the sayings on there says, "Hope is not a financial plan." It is so true. What would you say? Yeah, we talked a little bit about it. What would you say the financial education you wished you would have got?
Oh, that's hard to say because over time I've learned so much. And I would say you'd say something similar. If I wish going back, if I was to design a curriculum, I wish everyone would start with three books: How to Become Your Own Banker by Nelson Nash, The Richest Man in Babylon, and Rich Dad Poor Dad. I think those three combined give a pretty solid foundation that would help most people. What'd you say? I mean, if you were to go back however many years and have to redesign your own curriculum.
I would have to agree with you. Of course, my own books now, but however, those three books were pivotal for me in sort of my awakening, if you will, to get an education. I had a lot of schooling, right? I have a PhD in chemistry, as we've said on this podcast before. I had a lot of schooling, and I thought I was very well educated. That was one of my first realization is schooling does not equal education.
Well,
Education's more of a
well, tell us the
self-education.
story. You're teasing us here. Let's be a little bit open here. Jason went to Caltech for his postdoc. He worked with a Nobel Prize laureate. Like he's downplaying himself here. So if I understand it right, you were in that setting getting your postdoc, which you wrote in 6 weeks, which is unheard of. But it was that setting where this kind of spiraled into what we have today. So who was it that talked to you? What did they talk to you about, and what was said?
Well, I've tried to remember that exactly. It was one of my professors would tease us, well, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? And I was like, I didn't have an answer for that. My only answer is, well, I'm smart enough. I've got this great education, like you said. The guy I did my postdoc with won the Nobel Prize shortly after I was there. And, I went up to the San Francisco Bay Area and started in the six figures. So I'd made it. The reality was I was living paycheck to paycheck. I had two children, you being one of them, Scott. And then our third child was born while we were there in the Bay Area. The cost of living was so high and everything, it still felt like we were living paycheck to paycheck. And I was often going back to that question, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? And I finally felt like, well, you know what? I have gone basically from zero to an expert in a very, very small sliver of chemistry. I mean, I was a world expert. However, I thought, well, why can't I do that with money and the idea of getting rich? And so that started me thinking and started finding books and things to read. And the three that you talked about were pivotal in my education to start understanding how truly to build wealth.
And I want to clarify something because there's also a wives' tale or a belief that greed is bad. You should avoid it at all costs. Money is evil. And I don't believe those things. In the scriptures, it says that there is a time and a place for all things under heaven. That means there's a time and a place for greed. Greed can be helpful. There's a time and a place for laziness and other things. And so to understand money does not mean that it's wicked. It's the love of all money that is what the scriptures are pointing out. And so when we take that into perspective, it's good for you to study. The Lord says, be a good steward, right? And part of what we need to do is we need to learn those laws and master the temporal laws of money and other things in order for us to be able to be called to a higher calling, whether that's being a good father, whether that's being, maybe you're going to serve a mission. Maybe you want to donate to your church. Maybe you want to go back and be an adjunct professor and teach this stuff. I don't know, but you've got to start with the basics. And these are some of the basics that Jason has just pointed out. Everyone starts somewhere. And I'd say if I could go back and do it, is like I would put the whole education on the child, being like, hey, this will affect every aspect of life.
Right. And as you know, I mean, you read these books fairly early on. I mean, comparatively speaking, you talk to your peers, and many of them have not even read those books, and often they haven't even heard of those books and have no idea what's there. So it's extremely important. Well, let's talk for a minute about the real curriculum. So what could possibly be a curriculum, if you will, that people need to know? Let's break it down into basics. And yeah, go read these books and come back is a good answer. However, that's not going to suffice for everybody. So we're going to talk about 10 core money skills that I think everybody should learn. Okay. And the first one is cash flow. Now, why do you think it is that it's so important that you should track your income and expenses like a business?
Uh, because it's simple. You go out of business, you go bankrupt. If you're not bringing in more than you're sending out, then there's no way for you to grow or leave wealth on to your kids.
Okay. And business must do this, right? Like you said, or they go out of business. Yet often as an individual or as a family, all we do is go into further and further in debt until we are truly, and I don't like necessarily using the word, but we are slaves to the system. We're slaves to paying debt for the rest of our lives. And that is not a fun place to be. It's not very hopeful. It's not very fun. And you said a minute ago about it's the love of money that's the bad. Money is not inherently bad, right? And to be wealthy is not bad. And here's the reason. I can bless so many people, and it's limited by my own two hands and with my own time. However, the more money I have enough in the event I am employing that money to bless other people's lives, my ability to serve my fellow man, is unlimited. And the more wealth I have, the more I can serve people. Anyway,
Well,
let's go on to another.
I
Well,
would
go
take
ahead.
that a step further too. Just from the lending world, a lot of people rely on people like me to calculate, okay, what can you afford? What is your actual income? What are your actual expenses? They rely on third parties instead of really understanding what's going on behind the scenes. And a lot of times I see people get into bad situations because they let someone else tell them what's happening in their life versus understanding it. Because once you understand it, you can play the game rather than letting the game play you.
Absolutely. So, what we've talked about is an income statement in the business world. Every business has an income statement, right? Knowing the incomings and the outgoings and knowing what's going on. So, that is something that you must master. in the event you want to become wealthy. You must master your cash flow. Part of that is knowing, right? And that's the first step. So, everybody that's listening to that, in the event you don't have an income statement, a personal income statement, you need to get one. And you might even want to push pause on this podcast and start creating it. It's very simple. You can do it with a spreadsheet, you can do it with a piece of paper, whatever it is. You got one side or the top half, however you want to do it, the left side of the paper or the top part of the paper. This is all my income. Now, for
But
some
that
people, that
leads,
might
go ahead,
go
Jason.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say that leads perfectly into like the step 2 that we have planned, which is debt strategy, because that's the balance sheet. Those are the core statements that every business has when tracking anything. What are my assets? What are my liabilities? How much cash is going out? How much cash is going in? And so I would say that number 2 is understanding what good debt is and what bad debt is, and knowing how to use leverage to grow. Some people shouldn't be using leverage, right? Like Dave Ramsey's, I would say for 90% of people, his advice is good. But if you want to grow and actually get millions and master your millions, you do need to understand at a deep level is like, okay, I've got a primary residence. This is on my balance sheet. This is how much I owe a month. This is how much I owe. This is how much it's worth. It's not truly an asset because I'm not making money from it. And little characterizations along those lines that help not just you, but others understand how good of a financial situation you're in.
Okay, so let's review. Those two statements is what you need. There's an income statement, which is simply whether it's the left hand side of the page, you just make it two columns. This one side, left hand side, is all your income. Now, for some people, that might be their paycheck and only, right? And on the right side is all the expenses listed out, rent or mortgage, food costs, other utilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? As long as that income is greater than the outgoing, then you're in good health. And when it's not, then there's something that needs to change. Either the expenses need to be reduced or the income must increase. Very, very simple. The other one is a balance sheet, and that's a very similar format. On the left-hand side are assets, and on the right-hand side are liabilities. And as long as those add up and it's a positive number, then you're in good shape. So that was really cool. The next thing is asset control. And what would you talk about there, Scott, would be the most important thing when we're talking about asset control? Now, this is part of the balance sheet. What are we talking about?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is what the Rockefeller said before he died. He said, "Own nothing and control everything." And I laugh because the more and more that I learn, especially in the lending space, the more and more that becomes true for me. And so just to give a quick snippet is when you're trying to get a loan, if you own a rental property or a few rental properties and they're all being paid out of your personal account, I have to take that into calculation for your debt to income. There's no other way around it. But if title and there's a separate bank account in an LLC's name, not necessarily the loan, but the LLC's name, and the money's coming in and out of that other bank account, I don't have to include it at all. And so what's really, really cool is you still have 100% control. Your business can still pay you a salary or whatever it is, but it allows you to do more with less. It reminds me of something else that an attorney told us over this last week. He said, oh, what was his terms exactly? He said, oh, I just had it. What was it? I lost it. I had it.
No,
And
I'm sorry. I'm attempting to remember what you're talking about. Where are you going there?
Yeah,
Uh,
if I can remember, I'll bring it back up. But long story short is it's not about how much you earn. It's not about how much you have. It's about how much you keep. And it's that asset control and how you're controlling it that allows you to amplify it. It is essentially a lever for net profits, gains, or other things to be able to play the game.
okay. Love that. So number four on our top 10 list is liquidity and access. And it's basically answering the question, where is your money parked? Now, for most people, their money is parked in a 401k. And the second question is, can you get to your money without penalty? Now, there are provisions that you can take a withdrawal. Some people call it a loan from your 401k. It is not, it is a withdrawal. And they call it a loan for the fact that you must replace it um, within 5 years, I think it is, right? So, however, it's limited. I think the limit on that is $50,000. Well, if you're really going to grow, that's not much access to the money that you have. Where else is it parked? For some people, they might be in real estate. We've talked to a lot of people. They build up equity in a property, and even the banks call it dead equity. And often that's not accessible, right? You need to be able to put your money somewhere, park it, if you will, or rest it or store it, however you want to talk it, however you want to be able to get access to it without penalty. How often would you say, Scott, that a deal of a lifetime comes across your desk?
Once a week, comes around all the time. And that's the thing that people don't often recognize. And this is ties right back to number three is who controls your money. In this situation with a 401k is who is actually in control. I've got, let's just say I have $1 million and I can only get access to 50 grand. That's nothing. Like, what happens if I got medical bills? You are not in control. And so you need to be careful as you go through and think through that.
I agree. And talking about qualified plans, and there's lots of pros and cons. And it's interesting this year with the Secure Act 2, I think it was, there's nearly 30 changes to 401ks and in particular Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks. You got to scratch your head. Why is there so many changes? And who's making those changes? It's your partner in those accounts. They have the ability to make changes, and the changes are under the guise of to help us out. The reality is there's problems, there's holes, there's shortcomings of that technique, if you will, that they're attempting to fix. It's simply not the best place when it comes to having the ability to access your wealth to go after a deal of a lifetime. Like Scott says, they come around all the time. Those that have access or liquidity have the ability to jump on a deal, sometimes can make ridiculous rates of return. Now, I'm not sure what you call ridiculous. However, when most people's thinking is, well, I only can get 5, 6, 7, 8% in the stock market. Dave Ramsey would say you can do, 14% mutual funds, which I've never found one. Um, However, those types of returns are possible in alternative types of scenarios, particularly which we have found in Scott's world of lending and and real estate.
Yeah, I
So
would completely agree with that. And
let's go. Go
yeah,
ahead.
and that's really the thing is like liquidity. It's not just about how much money do I have access to. It ties through all of these bullet points. Like the income statement. Do I have 12 months of reserves? Or as some people put it, FU money. In the event that your job comes in, can you just say, screw you, I'm going to go find a better situation and I don't have to worry because I'm not living paycheck to paycheck? Or is it okay, someone's coming after me, I'm still extremely liquid, but I don't control it, so they can't get to that money. They're all of these steps are very intricately entwined, and that's why it's important to learn each one. And I think that's a beautiful segue into our fifth one, which is tax optimization, which this is where your legal team comes into the picture with your accounting team. And how do we optimize wealth? I mean, Jason, you often tell me what's the number one killer for wealth and generational wealth?
Taxes, absolutely taxes. Now, some people would put on behind that, health problems, a divorce, those other things like that. However, taxes eat into your wealth constantly. Once it's taxed, that money that the government gets goes away, and it goes away forever, right? Your ability to earn money on that, and the cost of your tax, let's say pay $10,000 in tax in 2025. Well, how much did I pay, or how much is that $10,000 worth in 2045 or 2035? Right? Because that money's gone. I could have been earning money on that, had I been making 8% or some amount, 5%, whatever. You see how taxes over time is just huge, and it is one of the biggest things. Scott, it's very interesting to me. What would you say? And let's just stick with these first five. How have you noticed me attempting to teach you these concepts?
Just over my life or recently?
Just over a lifetime. It says I think that's important to share how I teach these things, or how we teach these things.
Well, I think first and foremost is you brought it up to me when I was young. You didn't make it a tabooed subject, you made it something that we talked about, which I think is the first step in any kind of learning is awareness. Um,
Okay, so what would you say was your first business venture as a youngster?
we did quite a bit of mowing and just taking care of the properties. I'd probably say that.
What about a lemonade stand? Do you remember
Oh,
your first
no,
lemonade
no.
stand?
The first venture was I'm a professional artist. I sold a picture and negotiated with my mother for what, $4.25 way back when to buy my picture, and I haven't drawn anything since. So, I'm a one-hit wonder.
Okay, okay. Well, I wanted to talk about your lemonade stand. Now, I remember very distinctly. We had quite a bit of lemonade, like 2 liter bottles of lemonades, and you guys went out, and I believe you and Carter went out and down on the busy road and had your sign, or hollering, had ice and selling people lemonade. Do you remember coming back to the house with all this money and being super excited, and then me attempting to teach you, look, we have to take care of the expense, in other words, cost of goods, right? That's
I
just
do
okay. How
remember
much
that.
did the Okay, how much did the lemonade cost you so you could sell it? Were you selling it at a profit, right? And it makes no sense if the two liter bottle of lemonade cost you, $2, and when you sold it, a cup at a time, or and it's big cups, and you were only selling it for $1.50, that would have made no sense. And most people knew that. However, as a very youngster, that was something that I attempted to teach you, to know your expenses, particularly in business, and families. They must know their expenses. Going right back to our cash flow, number one is you got to know your income, and you got to know your outflows, your expenses. And when you know that, you then can adjust things. You may have, I mean, at that point, you made money. It was fine. And the next time around, we had those discussions. And I think it's great that you recognize that this is a discussion that we have had basically for as long as you remember, about money, and teaching you about cash flow, teaching about, an income statement and a balance sheet. Um, you know, a lot of advisors out there are going to teach you, or say, here's a product and everything's fine. Buy my product and you're done. It's a, you know, I don't know if you'd call it a McDonald's approach, but a fast food approach. You're just going through and done, right? They never really teach you about taxes or credit or investing or leveraging. Only thing they're ever talking about is budgeting. We're kind of running out of time here, Scott. This is kind of going long. Maybe we should cut this into 2 episodes, and we'll cover the next five in the next episode. How'd you feel about that?
I think that's a good idea. I was just thinking the same thing actually. And speaking of the first five, do you got any final comments or things that you'd like to leave with the listeners?
No, I don't think so. Hopefully, we've done that. In the event there are questions, we want the listeners to be interactive with us and putting it out there and letting us know what you think of it. So please give us a 5-star review. Subscribe, so you don't want to miss what's coming up. Some of the things that we're changing a little bit with our podcast, so that you get some straightforward answers to your questions. It's going to be hard hitting and straight at you.
I would agree. And I would also say is you do need to have an in-depth understanding of each of these, because before you can combine them all, you've got to understand each individual piece, just like cooking a recipe, just like playing sports in the fundamentals. But guys, we are grateful that you tuned in. If you do want to connect with Jason or I, look in the show notes down below. Join us on Facebook. We've got an investing group. Happy to have you there as well. Also, like Jason said, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us out and helps us with the algorithms. And last, remember that mastering your millions all starts with your mind and your team. Make sure they are the best. We will catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Millions with Jason and Scott Henderson. Check the show notes for any links or contact information about today's guest. Make sure to follow the show so you don't miss any future episodes.